They thought it would be a warning, a lesson carved in blood. The Zephyrian Empire dragged Marcus Kane, a captured human sniper, into the spotlight of 47 star systems, bound, bruised, and silent. Their cameras rolled, their voices mocked, and the galaxy watched. But as the executioner's blade fell, Marcus looked straight into the lens and whispered a single phrase, a phrase no one understood, except those who were waiting. 47 minutes later, their towers fell, their cities burned, and the stars remembered a sniper's last breath, not as surrender, but as the beginning of humanity's final answer. The show of power. The execution chamber on Zephyrian Prime gleamed with polished obsidian walls that reflected the harsh purple light of the planet's twin suns. Admiral Vextar adjusted his ceremonial armor, each piece crafted from the bones of conquered worlds. Today would be remembered across the galaxy as the day the human resistance finally died. Marcus Kane knelt in the center of the chamber, his wrist bound with energy shackles that hummed with contained violence. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eye, and his military fatigues were torn from weeks of interrogation. Yet his dark eyes remained steady, focused on something beyond the ornate walls that surrounded him. The human had been captured 3 months ago on the mining world of Kepler 442b. He had been picking off Zephyrian supply convoys with nothing more than an ancient projectile rifle and an uncanny ability to vanish into terrain that should have offered no cover. 17 successful strikes before they finally cornered him in a collapsed mine shaft. Vextar circled the prisoner slowly, his forearms gesturing dramatically for the cameras that would broadcast this moment to 47 star systems. The Admiral's scaled hide shimmered with excitement. This was more than an execution. This was a message. Citizens of the Zephyrian Empire, Vexitar's voice resonated through translation devices across the galaxy. Today we demonstrate what happens to those who dare challenge our authority. This human terrorist has murdered our soldiers, disrupted our commerce, and spread the poison of rebellion among our subjects. Marcus looked up at the Admiral, his weathered face showing neither fear nor defiance, only a strange sort of peace. At 53, he had lived through the first human-Zephyrian contact, the failed negotiations, and the swift conquests that followed. He had watched his homeworld of New Colorado burn from orbit as the Empire claimed it for mining rights. The cameras focused on Marcus as he spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "My name is Marcus Kane, Staff Sergeant, 3rd Human Colonial Marines, Service Number 2D847 Delta 9. Vextar's laugh was like grinding metal. "Your Colonial Marines are dust, human. Your governments are dissolved. Your species exists only to serve the Empire." Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe so, but you made one mistake, Admiral." "And what is that?" "You let me talk." The simple words hung in the air as Vexitar activated the execution device. A beam of concentrated energy would disintegrate Marcus from the cellular level up, leaving nothing but scattered atoms and the memory of pain. It was the Empire's preferred method for dealing with stubborn prisoners. As the device powered up with an ominous whine, Marcus closed his eyes and began to speak again. To the viewers across the galaxy, it sounded like rambling, a broken man's final desperate words. "Remember the summer of '89 when we caught those fireflies behind Old Man Patterson's barn?" Sarah laughed so hard she snorted milk through her nose. The creek was running high that year, full of promise and winter melt. We skipped stones until our arms were sore and the sun painted everything gold. The Zephyrian guards looked confused. Admiral Vextar frowned but allowed the human to continue. Let the galaxy hear the desperate babbling of a defeated enemy. Tommy's workshop smelled like sawdust and dreams. He always said the best wood came from trees that had seen enough seasons to know what they were made of. The oak behind the schoolhouse, the one with our initials carved deep. Mary said it would last forever, even when we couldn't. On 17 worlds, humans working in mining colonies and processing plants stopped what they were doing. The words meant nothing to their Zephyrian overseers, but to human ears they were code. Simple phrases that had been memorized and passed down through families, hidden in bedtime stories and work songs. The northern lights danced that winter night when Dad came home from the war. Mom cried tears that could fill the river, and we knew that some wounds never heal, but love finds a way to bridge the gap. The old radio in the kitchen, playing those songs that made your heart remember what it felt like to hope. Marcus opened his eyes and looked directly into the main camera. For just a moment, viewers across the galaxy saw something that made Admiral Vextar step backward. Not desperation or fear, but absolute certainty. 47 minutes, Marcus said clearly. That's all it takes for light to travel from here to the outer rim. 47 minutes for truth to reach every corner of this empire. 47 minutes for sleeping giants to wake up. The execution beam fired. Marcus Kane dissolved into light and memory, but his words continued to echo through communication networks across the galaxy. To the Zephyrians, it had been meaningless human sentiment. To the scattered cells of human resistance, it was the signal they had waited 3 years to hear. In the depths of the Titan mining complex on Proxima 7, a janitor named Elena Vasquez heard the broadcast on a hidden receiver built into her cleaning cart. She had been Marcus Kane's communications officer during the war, and she knew exactly what Summer of '89 meant. She pressed a concealed button, and throughout the complex, emergency bulkheads began sealing in a pattern that would trap the Zephyrian supervisors in their comfortable offices while cutting off power to the mining lasers. On the orbital shipyards above Kepler 186F, maintenance worker Jack Thompson received the signal through bone-conducting implants disguised as hearing aids. Tommy's workshop was his cue. Within minutes, he had introduced a simple computer virus into the shipyard's fabrication systems. It would take exactly 47 minutes to propagate through the network, at which point every ship under construction would suffer simultaneous structural failures in their hull plating. The message spread from world to world, carried by quantum communication arrays that the Empire had built to showcase their technological superiority. Each phrase triggered a different cell, activated different plans, set different timers, all counting down from the moment Marcus Kane died. Admiral Vextar stood in the execution chamber, basking in the glow of cameras and the satisfaction of a job well done. Around him, his staff officers congratulated each other on finally eliminating the human resistance's most effective operative. The execution had been broadcast to 47 star systems, showing everyone what happened to those who opposed Zephyrian rule. "Send a message to all sector commanders," Vextar ordered. "The human terrorist threat has been eliminated. Resume normal operations." His aide, a nervous young officer named Subcommander Clicks, bowed deeply. "At once, Admiral, though I must ask, what did the human mean about 47 minutes? Vextar waved dismissively. "The desperate words of a broken mind. Humans often babble nonsense when facing death. Their primitive brains cannot process the reality of their situation." The Admiral moved to his private quarters, eager to compose his report to the High Command. This execution would likely earn him a promotion, perhaps even a governorship of one of the Outer Rim sectors. The humans had been the last serious threat to Imperial expansion, and now they were leaderless. What Vextar didn't know was that Marcus Kane had never been the leader of the human resistance. He had been something far more dangerous, its inspiration. For 3 years, he had traveled from world to world not to organize a traditional rebellion, but to plant seeds. Simple plans that required no advanced technology, no complex coordination, no hierarchical command structure. Each cell operated independently, triggered by coded messages hidden in seemingly innocent broadcasts. They used the Empire's own infrastructure against them, exploiting the Zephyrians' fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. The Empire saw humans as primitive, violent creatures who relied on brute force and crude technology. They had studied human military doctrine, prepared for frontal assaults and guerrilla warfare. What they hadn't prepared for was patience. The uniquely human ability to wait, to endure, to hide in plain sight until the perfect moment to strike. On mining worlds and factory planets, in orbital stations and deep space installations, ordinary humans went about their daily routines. They cleaned floors and maintained equipment, processed ore and assembled components. To their Zephyrian overseers, they were invisible, part of the machinery of Empire. But in coffee shops and maintenance bays, in dormitories and service tunnels, the coded message spread from person to person. Children playing games that seemed meaningless to alien guards. Workers humming old songs while they labored. Couples sharing bedtime stories that their grandparents had told them. The Zephyrian Empire prided itself on total surveillance, on knowing everything that happened within its borders, but they only listened for the languages they understood, only watched for the behaviors they recognized as threatening. They had never learned to hear the quiet conversations in maintenance shafts, never thought to decode the meaning hidden in human lullabies. As Admiral Vextar composed his victory report, the countdown continued. Across 47 star systems, ordinary humans checked their watches, synchronized their movements, and prepared to show the galaxy that sometimes the greatest weapons are the ones your enemy never sees coming. The execution of Marcus Kane was supposed to end the human resistance. Instead, it had just begun the 47 most important minutes in galactic history. In prison cells and labor camps, human captives who had survived the initial conquest heard whispered accounts of the broadcast. The word spread like wildfire through hidden communication networks, carrying hope to places where hope had died years ago. The Empire had made Marcus Kane a martyr, but more than that, they had given him the largest audience in galactic history. 47 star systems had watched a human face death with courage and purpose. They had heard his final words, seen his unwavering certainty that his sacrifice meant something. The timer was running, and the Zephyrian Empire had no idea that their moment of greatest triumph was about to become their darkest hour. Minutes of chaos. The first sign of trouble came at exactly 47 minutes after Marcus Kane's execution, when the lights went out on Titan Mining Complex. Elena Vasquez stood in the maintenance tunnel 3 levels below the main processing floor, watching the seconds tick down on her chronometer. Around her, 6 other humans waited in the darkness, their faces illuminated only by the soft glow of emergency lighting. They were janitors, mechanics, cafeteria workers, people the Zephyrians had learned to ignore. "Time," Elena whispered. She pressed the final sequence into her maintenance terminal, and throughout the complex, every automated system began to fail in carefully orchestrated chaos. The mining lasers that carved precious metals from asteroid ore suddenly developed targeting errors, firing into empty space instead of rock. Atmospheric processors started mixing gases in combinations that created harmless but foul-smelling clouds. Gravity generators fluctuated just enough to make walking difficult without causing permanent harm. To the Zephyrian supervisors sealed in their offices, it looked like a cascade of random system failures. They tried to override the lockdowns, but found that every security protocol had been changed. The computers recognized their access codes but refused their commands, displaying error messages in languages the translation software couldn't parse. What the Zephyrians didn't realize was that the error messages were actually old Earth poetry, uploaded by a night shift programmer who had died in the war, but left his work hidden in the system for 3 years. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on dozens of worlds. On the orbital shipyards above Kepler 186f, Jack Thompson watched from the observation deck as the first hull sections began to buckle. His virus had done exactly what Marcus Kane had designed it to do, introducing microscopic flaws in the molecular bonding process. To quality control scanners, the hulls looked perfect, but under the stress of atmospheric pressure testing, they crumpled like paper. The Zephyrian engineers panicked as ship after ship failed catastrophically. Months of work, billions of credits in materials, all reduced to floating scrap metal. They ran diagnostics, brought in experts, even consulted their military's top scientists. None of them thought to check the waste recycling systems, where Jack had hidden his virus in the code that processed garbage from the workers' quarters. Sub-Commander Clicks burst into Admiral Vextar's quarters without knocking, his scales pale with fear. "Admiral, we're receiving reports of system failures across multiple sectors." Vextar looked up from his victory report, annoyed by the interruption. "What kind of failures?" "Everything, sir. Mining operations, shipyards, communications relays, even some of our prison facilities. It started 47 minutes ago." The significance of the timing hit Vextar like a physical blow. He had dismissed the human's final words as meaningless babble, but now doubt crept into his mind like ice water through cracked armor. "Status report from all sector commanders," he ordered. "I want to know the scope of these failures." The reports that came in over the next few minutes painted a picture that defied explanation. On Rigel Station, the central computer had begun playing human music at maximum volume through every speaker in the facility, including the ones in the Zephyrian Command Center. On New Carthage, automated food dispensers had started producing nothing but a bitter paste that smelled like rotting eggs. On Proxima Mining World 7, gravity generators were randomly switching on and off, creating localized areas of 0G that sent Zephyrian supervisors floating helplessly through corridors. None of it was deadly. None of it was even particularly destructive in monetary terms. But all of it was humiliating, and it was happening simultaneously across 47 star systems. Dr. Sarah Chen worked as a research assistant in the Zephyrian Science Institute on Europa Station, cataloging alien artifacts that the Empire had collected from conquered worlds. She had been Marcus Kane's wife before the war, and she had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. When the coded message reached her, she walked calmly to the Institute's main database and inserted a data crystal that looked identical to the hundreds of others she processed daily. The crystal contained a simple program that Marcus had written himself, designed to do one thing: tell the truth. Across the Empire's information networks, the program spread like wildfire, replacing official news broadcasts with footage that the Zephyrians had tried to suppress. Images of human cities burning during the conquest, videos of families being separated and sent to different labor camps, audio recordings of Imperial officers discussing humans as if they were livestock. But the most powerful piece of footage was Marcus Kane's execution, replayed over and over with his coded message translated into dozens of languages. Other species that the Empire had conquered began to understand what the human had really been saying in his final moments. On the prison world of Terminus 7, 1,000 human captives heard the translation through hidden receivers that had been built into seemingly broken pieces of equipment. Marcus's words hadn't been random memories at all. They had been instructions, coordinates, timing sequences. Everything the prisoners needed to coordinate a breakout. The Zephyrian guards noticed nothing unusual when the humans began their evening work detail, cleaning the corridors, maintaining the power systems, preparing meals in the kitchens, the same routine they had followed for years. But at exactly 47 minutes after Marcus Kane's death, every human prisoner suddenly knew exactly where to be and what to do. The breakout began in the kitchens, where a cook named Maria Santos had spent 2 years learning the exact timing of the guard rotations. She triggered a small fire in the main preparation area. Nothing dangerous but smoky enough to activate the evacuation protocols. As guards rushed to respond, prisoners in maintenance areas were already cutting power to the cell blocks. The Zephyrians had designed their prison to contain humans using human psychology. Bright lights to prevent depression, comfortable temperatures to reduce aggression, regular schedules to maintain order. What they hadn't considered was that humans could use the same systems against them. Emergency lighting was designed to guide prisoners to safety areas during crises, but Sarah Martinez, who worked in the prison's technical services, had spent months secretly reprogramming the lights to guide prisoners to weapons storage instead. The Zephyrians had studied human military tactics, but had never encountered a rebellion that used their own safety systems as weapons. Within 30 minutes of the breakout beginning, human prisoners had taken control of 3 entire cell blocks and were systematically releasing captives from other species. The Zephyrians found themselves facing not just a human rebellion, but a coordinated uprising of every enslaved race in the prison. Back on Zephyrian Prime, Admiral Vextar's command center had become a scene of barely controlled panic. Status boards showed red alerts across the Empire, and the communication channels were clogged with desperate calls for reinforcements. "Sir," Sub-Commander Clix's voice cracked with strain. "We're receiving reports of prison breaks on 17 worlds. The humans seem to be coordinating with other prisoner populations." Vextar's 4 hands moved frantically over his control interface, trying to make sense of the chaos. "How is this possible? We eliminated their leadership. We destroyed their communication networks." "Sir, I don't think they needed traditional communications," Clix said quietly. "The timing is too precise to be coincidental. Somehow they planned all of this before the war ended." The Admiral's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. The humans hadn't been fighting a conventional resistance at all. The Admiral's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. The humans hadn't been fighting a conventional resistance at all. They had been preparing for this moment, seeding the Empire with sleeper agents who had waited patiently for years for the signal to act. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, where Marcus Kane had been captured, a group of human workers gathered around an ancient radio in the depths of the main excavation site. They had been listening to Imperial news broadcasts when the signal hijacking began, and now they heard Marcus's voice speaking to them from beyond death. The mine foreman, a Zephyrian named Kextal, noticed the unusual gathering and approached with 2 guards. "What is the meaning of this assembly? Return to your workstations immediately." The humans looked up at him with expressions he had never seen before, not the resignation and fear he was accustomed to, but something else, something that made his scales crawl with primitive alarm. An elderly human woman named Rose Patterson stepped forward. She had been working in the mines for 3 years, always quiet, always compliant. Now she smiled at the foreman with the kind of gentle warmth that predators recognize as genuine danger. "We're just listening to the news, sir," she said in perfect Zephyrian. "Would you like to hear what they're saying about your empire?" Before Kextal could respond, the mine's public address system crackled to life with the same hijacked broadcast that was spreading across the galaxy. The translated version of Marcus Kane's final message, interspersed with footage of Imperial atrocities, played at volume levels that made it impossible to ignore. Throughout the mine, human workers stopped what they were doing and listened. They didn't attack their guards or sabotage equipment. They simply stopped working and paid attention to the truth that was finally being told. The Zephyrian guards tried to restore order, but found that their weapons had been subtly sabotaged over months of careful preparation. Stun batons that delivered mild shocks instead of paralysis. Communication devices that transmitted nothing but static. Even their armor had been compromised, joints loosened just enough to restrict movement without being obvious. The humans had learned that the most effective rebellion wasn't always the most violent one. Sometimes it was enough to simply stop cooperating with your oppressors. As the 47-minute mark passed and the initial wave of coordinated actions concluded, Admiral Vextar stood in his command center and watched his empire begin to crumble in real time. Status reports continued to pour in, each one worse than the last. Industrial accidents that weren't accidents, computer viruses that turned vital systems into elaborate pranks, prison breaks that freed not just humans but every enslaved species in the galaxy, and everywhere the constant broadcast of Marcus Kane's execution and final message, spreading truth faster than the Empire could contain it. The Admiral realized with growing horror that they had made a fatal mistake. They had given Marcus Kane exactly what he wanted, an audience. The execution that was supposed to demonstrate Imperial power had instead become the catalyst for the Empire's destruction. In the span of 47 minutes, a dead human had accomplished what armies couldn't. He had turned the Empire's greatest strength, their communication network, into the weapon that would destroy them. The countdown was over, but the real battle was just beginning. When giants stumble. 3 hours after Marcus Kane's execution, the Zephyrian Empire was dying. Admiral Vextar stood before the High Command Council on Zephyrian Prime, his ceremonial armor dulled by sweat and his 4 hands shaking with barely controlled rage. Around the obsidian table sat the Empire's most powerful leaders, their scaled faces reflecting the red glow of emergency lighting that had replaced the normal illumination when the main power grid failed. "Explain to us," hissed Empress Zixara, her voice like grinding stone, "how a dead human terrorist has crippled our entire civilization." Vextar's throat sac inflated with nervous tension. "Your Majesty, we underestimated the scope of their preparation. This wasn't a traditional resistance movement. It was something else entirely." The reports had been flooding in for hours now, 47 star systems in chaos, mining operations shut down by workers who had simply walked away from their posts, shipyards producing vessels that fell apart before they could leave dry dock. Communication networks hijacked to broadcast the execution footage on endless loop, translated into every language in the galaxy. But worse than the industrial sabotage were the prison breaks. Across the Empire, human captives had coordinated simultaneous escapes with timing so precise it defied explanation. They had freed not just themselves but every other enslaved species they encountered, turning isolated incidents into system-wide rebellions. "The humans had no central command," reported Intelligence Chief Mordock, his voice hollow with disbelief. "No communication network we could detect, no hierarchy to decapitate. They operated in completely independent cells, activated by coded signals hidden in their final terrorist's execution speech." Empress Zixara's claws scraped against the table surface. "How is such coordination possible without our surveillance detecting it?" Dr. Sarah Chen could have answered that question, but she was currently 3 levels below the Imperial Science Institute on Europa Station, watching Zephyrian security forces search frantically for the source of the data breach that had exposed decades of Imperial atrocities. She sat in a maintenance shaft, surrounded by the detritus of alien civilization, and smiled at the beautiful irony of it all. The Empire had conquered humanity through superior technology and overwhelming force, but they had never understood the human capacity for patient, methodical preparation. Marcus Kane hadn't been just her husband. He had been a military strategist who understood that conventional warfare against the Zephyrian Empire was suicide. So he had designed something else entirely, a rebellion that used the Empire's own strengths against them. The coded messages hidden in his final speech hadn't just been tactical instructions. They had been the keys to unlock 3 years of careful preparation. Every human who worked in Imperial facilities had been slowly, carefully, invisibly preparing for this moment. A janitor who moved cleaning supplies could also move small electronic components. A cook who prepared meals could introduce harmless but foul-smelling additives to Zephyrian food supplies. A maintenance worker who repaired equipment could introduce subtle flaws that would manifest weeks or months later. Most importantly, humans who appeared to be cooperating with their conquerors could gather intelligence, map security systems, and identify the critical vulnerabilities that kept the Empire functioning. The Zephyrians had studied human military history and prepared for guerrilla warfare, terrorism, and conventional rebellion. What they hadn't prepared for was 3 years of humans who said yes sir and thank you sir while methodically learning how to make their entire civilization stop working. On Terminus 7, former Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez led a mixed group of escaped prisoners through the prison's own supply tunnels. The breakout had been only the beginning. Now came the real test. Could humans lead a successful uprising among species that had never learned to fight back? The answer, it turned out, was yes. The Kelhari were a peaceful race of scholars who had been enslaved to serve as living computers in imperial research facilities. They had never raised a weapon in their 1,000-year history. But when Elena showed them how to use their own mathematical abilities to crash the prison's navigation systems, they discovered that rebellion could be as elegant as an equation. The Vorthon had been warrior poets before their conquest, but decades of captivity had broken their spirit, until a human grandmother named Mae Washington taught them to sing their ancient battle hymns while rewiring the prison's communication arrays. Their voices, raised in harmony for the first time in 30 years, carried across the installation like a promise of freedom. The prison warden. Gexmore found himself barricaded in his own command center, watching his facility tear itself apart from within. The escaped prisoners weren't just running away. They were systematically dismantling every system that kept the prison operational, using techniques that seemed to come from nowhere. "Sir," his aide whispered, "the humans are teaching the others. They're sharing knowledge, coordinating strategies. It's like they've turned the entire prison into a training ground for rebellion." Gexmore stared at the security monitors in horror. In the main assembly area, humans were conducting what looked like classes, teaching other species how to sabotage equipment, how to coordinate without traditional communications, how to turn everyday objects into tools of resistance. The most terrifying part was how calm they were about it. No screaming, no violence for its own sake. Just methodical, patient instruction in the art of bringing down an empire. Back on Zephyrian Prime, the situation had deteriorated beyond Admiral Vextar's worst nightmares. The Empire's response to the coordinated uprisings had made everything worse. Military forces sent to restore order found that their equipment had been sabotaged by the same human maintenance workers who had repaired it for years. Ships that should have been able to travel between star systems in hours, instead, found themselves stranded in deep space when their navigation computers began displaying nothing but old Earth poetry. Troops that should have been able to communicate through quantum entanglement arrays instead heard nothing but static mixed with what sounded like human children singing lullabies. "The worst part," reported Fleet Commander Hickstel, "is that none of it is random. Every failure, every malfunction, every breakdown is precisely timed to cause maximum disruption. It's like they've been planning this for years." Because they had been. Marcus Kane had understood that the Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. The Zephyrians had built a civilization based on the assumption that their technology was superior to everyone else's, that their understanding of the universe was more complete, that their methods were more efficient. They had never considered the possibility that primitive humans might use that technological superiority against them. Dr. Chen emerged from the maintenance shafts into the main laboratory of the Science Institute, where Zephyrian researchers were frantically trying to understand how their entire database had been compromised. They ran scan after scan, analyzed every line of code, searched for the sophisticated virus that must have been responsible. They never found it, because there was no virus. Just a simple program that did exactly what it was designed to do: tell the truth. The database hadn't been hacked or corrupted. It had simply been convinced to share information that the Empire had tried to keep secret. "Excuse me," Dr. Chen said politely to the head researcher, "but I think I can help you understand what happened." Dr. Colvex turned to stare at the human research assistant he had barely noticed for 3 years. "You? What could you possibly know about our security systems?" Sarah smiled the same gentle smile that her husband had worn in his final moments. "More than you might think. You see, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I hold 3 degrees in computer science from Earth universities that no longer exist. And for the past 3 years, I've been cataloging not just your artifacts, but your security protocols, your database structures, and your fundamental misunderstanding of human capability." The blood drained from Colvex's scaled features as the implications hit him. "You're one of them. You're part of this conspiracy." "Conspiracy?" Sarah laughed, a sound like water running over stones. "Doctor, there was no conspiracy. There were just humans doing what humans do when they're pushed too far. We adapt, we improvise, we find ways to survive and thrive in circumstances that should have destroyed us." She gestured to the chaos visible through the laboratory windows, where Zephyrian security forces were trying to restore order to systems that no longer recognized their authority. "My husband knew that you would never understand us. You studied our military tactics and our political structures, but you never learned the most important thing about humanity. We don't need hierarchies to cooperate. We don't need advanced technology to be effective. We just need a reason to care about something bigger than ourselves. Across the galaxy, the pattern was repeating. Humans who had seemed broken and defeated were revealing themselves to be architects of the Empire's destruction. They emerged from maintenance shafts and storage closets, from kitchens and cleaning supplies, from every corner where the Empire had learned to ignore them. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Rose Patterson stood before the assembled workers and spoke in a voice that carried the authority of someone who had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. "The foreman asked what we were listening to," she said, her words echoing through the mine's public address system. "We were listening to the truth about what they did to our worlds, the truth about what they plan to do to other species, and the truth about what we've been preparing to do about it." The Zephyrian guards found themselves surrounded not by angry mobs, but by organized groups of workers who had spent years learning every detail of the mine's operation. They knew which systems were critical, which could be safely shut down, and exactly how to disable the facility without causing casualties. It wasn't warfare in the traditional sense. It was something far more dangerous to an empire built on the assumption of superiority. It was competence. Empress Zixara stood in the ruins of her command center, watching 47 star systems slip out of Imperial control in real time. The rebellions were spreading beyond the original systems now, as news of the uprisings reached other worlds and other species found the courage to act. "How do we stop this?" she demanded. Admiral Vextar's answer was barely a whisper. "I don't think we can, Your Majesty. The humans didn't just plan a rebellion. They planned our replacement." The reports were conclusive. On every world where the uprisings had succeeded, the humans were already working with other liberated species to establish basic services, maintain critical infrastructure, and create systems of governance that included everyone who had been enslaved by the Empire. They hadn't just learned how to tear down the Zephyrian system, they had learned how to build something better in its place. As the twin suns of Zephyrian Prime set behind clouds of smoke from burning Imperial facilities, Marcus Kane's final message continued to broadcast across the galaxy. His words had triggered the 47 most important minutes in galactic history, but their impact would be felt for generations to come. The execution that was supposed to end human resistance had instead become the beginning of galactic liberation. One man's sacrifice had toppled an empire, not through violence or superior technology, but through the simple human understanding that sometimes the best way to fight an enemy is to become indispensable to them first. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled through fear and technological superiority, but they had never learned to rule through respect or cooperation. When their subjects stopped being afraid and started working together, the Empire discovered that their greatest strength had been an illusion all along. The age of human defiance had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.